So I think we start again.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second session of the day. The topic for this second plenary is governing collective action. We'll be talking a lot about governing stakeholder relations and also cross-sector partnerships. The format is quite similar to what we had in the first one. We again have two academics and then a reaction from a practitioner, and before we open up the floor. And so in our case, we'll start with Aline Gatignon. Aline is assistant professor of management at the Wharton School. She's an expert in cross-sector partnerships, focusing both on the social side, so social impact and social value, but also from the point of view of value creation for firms. Thank you, Aline, for having flying across the ocean to be here with us. Then move to Ilse. Ilse is an assistant professor of strategy at INSEAD. She's also an expert in cross-sector partnerships, and in particular in public-private partnerships. Ilse is currently in a very busy teaching season, so I really appreciate her taking the time to be with us also. Following the two academic presentations, which I believe will take around half an hour or so, we'll then have the pleasure of hearing the reactions and experience from Gilles Vermont. Gilles is the Senior VP for Corporate Citizenship at Schneider Electric. He's a long-term partner of the SNO Institute and the Inclusive Economy Center in particular. And he has extensive experience with sustainability issues and governing stakeholders in practice. So I'm looking forward to the talks. And then afterwards, I'll just open up the floor and you guys get to ask questions, make comments. Okay? So without further ado, I'll open the floor to Aline.
Okay, good morning. It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for the SNO Institute and the organizers for inviting me. It's an absolute delight to talk about this topic with you today. As Leandro said, my work is really about the intersection of public, private, and nonprofit interests. I study how organizations from these three sectors can work together to solve social issues of mutual interest, with the premise that because these organizations from these different sectors come to us with different capabilities, interests, vocabulary, networks, legitimacy, approaches, by bringing them together, they can also help solve issues that are beyond the scope of a single organization or sector. Of course, because of those very differences, there are also collaboration challenges, issues about how you set up collective governance across these very different organizations from different sectors. And so my research focus is really on trying to enhance the benefits that we can get from public-private partnerships in the form of cross-sector partnerships, and how we can help solve some of these intractable issues such as grand challenges, but also how we can do so while lowering some of the coordination challenges that they represent. And these relationships across these two sectors, these partnerships, there's a life cycle to them. And there are challenges that come up at different stages of the life cycle. But today what I'd like to focus on is the challenge of how do we actually get these started? How do we get them off the ground? How do we start or trigger or unlock collective action across sectors? I'm going to give you examples based on my research with colleagues where we have three different types of organizations who are leading cross-sector partnerships, who get them started. I'm going to give you one example of private sector leadership with Brazilian cosmetics firm Natura. I'm going to give you one example of nonprofit sector leadership with the North Star Alliance. And I'm going to give you one example that I'll go into in a little bit more depth on public sector leadership, also from Brazil, looking at a community policing initiative. And I should start here by really thanking also all of the wonderful colleagues and co-authors that have been and continue to work with me on these projects. So let me first tell you about a paper that I wrote that was published in 2023 with Laurence Capron from INSEAD, where we studied the Brazilian cosmetics company Natura and how it developed sustainable eco-sourcing and distribution throughout its supply chain. And in particular, there were a number of challenges that it encountered that had to do with the fact that there was a lack of institutional infrastructure for developing their supply chain. So things like, if we're going to source ecologically ingredients from the Brazilian biomes, we want to work with local communities who have knowledge of how to do that and how to preserve the forested areas, but also the ingredients, their characteristics, how we can use them in our cosmetics products. And yet this is the kind of knowledge that we don't really have a legal framework for how do we compensate these communities for it, right? And the legal framework in Brazil, as well as internationally, was quite vague for doing so. And one of the things that Natura did was to engage with actors from local communities, nonprofits, other private sector organizations, et cetera, and create networks where here you can see this is a network that is drawn based on their 2009 annual report. And you can see that each dot is a partner with Natura in the center, and the connections among them really showcase how Natura brought together combinations of organizations from different sectors who really interacted jointly to create new solutions that would really work for everybody and that they could scale up. In the paper, we talk about how Natura essentially adapted polycentric governance design principles that have been developed through initially the work of Eleanor Armstrong, but adapted them for a private sector leadership model, which means that you have to overcome gaps in trust towards the private sector, and you have to learn to work with organizations that are potentially of a much smaller scale, where you have to take into account power imbalances. And I won't go into the details of the design, how they adapted the design principles for this, but one of the kind of, I think one of the quotes from some of our qualitative work really showcases what this looked like. And they said, at Natura, we really didn't want to be the drum beater. We wanted to, or the standard, sorry, we didn't want to be the standard bearer, bringing up the flag and saying, rah, 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 this is what we're doing, follow us. We really wanted to be more of the drum beater, right? In the back of the troops and really kind of convening and making sure that everybody is marching in step. So that's one example. Let me talk to you a little bit about another example that has to do with nonprofit leadership instead. So as part of my dissertation, I studied a 10-year partnership between TNT, a global logistics provider, and the United Nations World Food Program. And they set up an independent foundation that was tasked with trying to bring healthcare to mobile populations at risk of HIV and AIDS across sub-Saharan Africa. So setting up mobile clinics in transport containers that would be at roadside rest stops for, in particular, long-distance truck drivers and sex workers to give them access to healthcare that they didn't have. And when we, so this is joint work with Julien Clément, Leo Pangilupe, and Luc van Rassenhoff. And some of the things that we see these clinics really accomplish very well is drawing on internal support from, in particular, their regional managers to help them direct their external relationships with all kinds of different partners in ways that are going to be more efficient for them. And we see two main models kind of emerge from this. One, which we call the potluck model, is about how you develop a network of donor relationships. These donor relationships can be incredibly helpful for these clinics, but they can also create an administrative burden and a power imbalance. How do they actually manage these without being overwhelmed? Without being unable to focus on the operations of running a clinic and engaging with their stakeholders on the ground. They do it by having their regional coordinators come in and take over a lot of the administration, right? Do we make sure that we're able to create reports in the formats that different donors want? Are we able to push back on demands that sometimes align with donor objectives and priorities, but not necessarily our own as clinics in terms of getting access to the most people? Another model is what we call the community kitchen model, where you work with a bunch of external partners who are much more kind of, they're not bringing resources to you, but you're co-creating different kinds of solutions together. And so they don't have as much of a donor contribution, but you have to manage, nevertheless, these very complex relationship dynamics, and you have to spend a lot of time as a clinic manager really engaging on a relational level. And there, the regional manager can really help you out in terms of growing that network. And in particular, as you grow a diverse set of cross-sector partnerships, you're going to get different perspectives that may clash. And that's where the regional manager can really help. So here we develop a notion that the design principle that really helps this nonprofit lead collective governance is to develop interfaces between their internal structure and communications and their external structure that can help minimize some of the coordination costs. As a nonprofit, the resource scarcity is really a key thing to deal with. Let me give you an example now from ongoing work that was spearheaded by Daphne Coelho, who is a student of Sergio Lazzarini in Brazil at INSPER. She was at Wharton for the past year, visiting with Leandro Pongilupe and I. And this project really focuses on community policing efforts. This is a project called the Unidade Pacificadoras, so UPPs, who targeted violence reduction and recovery of gang territories through community policing in favelas in Rio de Janeiro. So a lot of the population worldwide actually lives in urban slums. And in this case, we're really seeing a circumstance where you have an issue of developing these areas because there's a complete lack of government presence. And in particular, that means that there's a lot of violence in these areas, and the UPPs were initially meant to diminish that violence as a way to kind of unlock growth and development in these parts of Rio. And so they were implemented in 37 favelas between 2008 and 2014. And our initial idea was to try to demonstrate how potentially that introduction of a government presence could unlock organizational growth and diversity in these places. Here's just a map that shows you the evolution over time of where the UPPs were implanted. And so you can see that the favelas with UPP in blue are expanding over time. Those without are still in yellow. And so from a research perspective, this gives us an opportunity to actually study the evolution of organizations, violence, and socioeconomic indicators over time in the favelas that had interventions of the UPBs and those that did not. And so we use a number of different data sources. The treatment, what we'll talk about is the treatment here, is the intervention of the UPPs compared to either these favelas before the UPPs entered or other favelas where the UPPs never entered. And we're looking to look on the effects on crime, on the diverse types of organizations that develop and are founded and grow in these places, as well as social developmental indicators like income and employment evolution. So the methods we're going to use are two-stage differences and differences. We're going to use an instrumental variable approach that I'll discuss in a second. And then we'll kind of unpack the heterogeneity, the mechanisms, et cetera. And we're currently gathering qualitative data to try to better understand what's going on. So here's a view of graphs that show you the evolution in crime before and after the introduction of the UPPs. So you can see that's from time one onwards. And we can see that there is, in general, a reduction in different types of crime. However, we can also see that, contrary to our expectations, there's a decrease in organizational development after the introduction of the UPPs. And in particular, we have less diverse organizations in terms of their legal forms, public, private, et cetera. And what we're seeing is mostly a very strong effect on private organizations being formed in these favelas. In terms of the socioeconomic impact, we also see that there's a decrease in employment and an average salary. So what exactly is going on here? This is pretty much the opposite of what we expected. I do want to make sure the first kind of thing we thought was, well, maybe there's something about the favelas where the UPPs were implanted that makes them fundamentally different than those where they weren't implanted in ways that might be influencing our results. And so we conduct an additional analysis where we have an independent variable that we use as a first stage to predict where the influencing where these UPPs will be implemented, so the choice of which favelas to enter, and then still are able to account for that in looking at the results. And so the instrument we use is the distance from the Cristo Redentor, which is this iconic statue within Rio de Janeiro, and it denotes kind of some of the highest places of tourist interest, with the idea that part of the incentive for launching the UPPs was to diminish rates of crime and violence close to tourist destinations in preparations for major events like the Olympics or the World Soccer Cup. And we find that our results are actually robust. So in terms of what we think is going on here, we have kind of these three different, if we consider these three different models of leadership in launching cross-sector partnerships, we have some solutions with private sector leadership that have to do with adaptation of polycentric design features. We have these interfacing design features between the internal and the external when it's nonprofit leadership, so we can reduce costs. What do we have here? We had assumed that with public sector leadership, we would actually use that as kind of a trigger that would then create kind of a gravitational pull, right? Once the government enters and we reduce violence, then there's going to be a pull towards other sectors' development, and it'll kind of create a huge increase, and we're not seeing that to be the case, right? And in part, we think that a big reason for this is that when the UPPs entered these favelas, they didn't bring cross-sector partners with them. Right? And so I think this is a very nice kind of transition to Ilse, who is our expert on public-private partnerships. But I think the takeaway for us here is that you can't just assume that bringing in, solving one issue or bringing in the government is going to be sufficient. If we want to catalyze cross-sector collaboration, we actually need to think very carefully about what are the design features that align with different types of leadership of these types of initiative. Thank you very much. Look forward to the rest of the session.
Okay, thank you very much. Wow, this is loud. I'll keep a distance. Thank you so much, Aline, first of all, for the nice introduction. Thank you, Leandro, for bringing us together. This could not be a better design choice than to have us both speak. And it's really a pleasure. And above all, thank you for inviting me to this. This feels very much like homecoming for me. You may not know, I'm a PhD graduate from HEC Paris, so it's coming back to the roots. My amazing supervisor is here in the room, and so I really feel honored to be here. So thank you. So my talk will build very much on the topic of collaboration and with additional spin of how we can think of new forms of organizing and how that can help us address some of the grand challenges of our times. And I think it's going to be very complementary to what you just heard from Aline. And not surprisingly, let me break the suspense, you'll also hear about Brazil. So this is going to be one of the settings we will talk about. But first, maybe a few reflections and also what I do. So a lot of my work revolves perhaps around the central question, which is how do different organizational forms and forms of collaboration, but not only, new diverse forms of organizing, such as, for instance, social franchises, help and contribute to delivering social value. Now, this is a grand question, but it builds very, very closely to the understanding that we are all faced with the Sustainable Development Goals, and we are really falling behind in delivering those. By the way, not many people know that the last goal is partnerships for the goals, and so in a way, one of the goals is actually encompassing also the solution to addressing those goals. But there are many areas where those partnerships take place, maybe fraught with difficulties, many areas where more can be done. And more broadly, we also need to understand the comparative role of public versus private versus civic sector organizations and the complementarities that exist between these different actors. And so my work is very much in the area of number of these goals, notably water and sanitation, which is perhaps one of the most crucial grand challenges we're facing, with about 1/3 of the world population already expected to have massive drinking water shortages. So I'm working particularly looking at water and sanitation provision, number of projects. Also in healthcare, working on a project in South Africa that brings affordable general healthcare through very unique social franchise model to the local disenfranchised communities. I'm going to be there actually at the end of April to visit the organization, and also and I'm going to talk about it in this presentation in the education sector, which is another of the grand challenges, and how do we address that. The way I'm coming is an academic perspective, and I'm sorry for that. Academics, we tend to run sometimes behind practice, and this is the case, I think, in public-private partnerships. Well, we're sort of discovering things as they are evolving, but there's been now about a decade or more of work and interest, and we start to accumulate body of knowledge, what this represents. And we also understand the cross-sector collaboration is not just this one type of strange animal. It is actually different forms of organizing, and we are starting just to explore the heterogeneity or diversity that it exists between them. And maybe the way how at least academically we've gone from that is that at the very beginning, a lot of focus, especially in economics, was around the outsourcing, notably move from public sector to outsource to the private sector to build on the more efficiency. This has grown to kind of bigger encompassing circles, to understanding, okay, beyond just these outsourcing relations, we can now talk about public-private partnerships. Now we can introduce, as Aline presented, third partners. So this is an NGO, so it becomes a three-party or cross-sector collaboration. And then we even can extend and say, well, there are some organizations that don't even fit neatly into one of those buckets, or maybe are almost ecosystems, or sometimes are called meta-organizations, particularly in emerging countries or these grand challenge settings. And likewise, our understanding where should we focus has evolved, because traditionally in public administration, you focused on the public services. And this has grown to encompass and understand the broader set of activities, and ultimately that everything that we as organizations do has the impact on social sector. And of course, economists have always known it and talked about externalities, but we're now trying to understand how do we bring those externalities as a black box back into our research and at the center of what these collaborations do and try to achieve. And so I also have three insights I wanted to highlight here before I go into one specific research project. And these insights, they are actually part of a chapter that we published recently with my co-author, Jens Erik. In these three insights, we try to encapsulate our understanding what are some of the key challenges and tensions that need to be addressed by any form of public-private collaboration or cross-sector partnership. What are the imperatives? And this comes largely from the design thinking and the collaboration literature, and it revolves around understanding that any organization or collaboration needs to tackle three things at the same time. The first one is the cooperation challenge, and this is very much about how do we align incentives for all the different actors together. Okay. So some of the insights we have there is this is absolutely crucial if we want to address the social interest. You know, how do we align incentives for sustainable resource use, particularly, for instance, in water and sanitation sector? We have increasing body of research. If you're interested, I put some papers there that show how the governance is the key tool with which we can try to shape and affect the value outcomes, how social value is distributed, also innovation outcomes in some of those partnerships. And of course, some of the work that I've been happy to be involved as well shows that the role of capabilities and resources is critical. And we tend to associate that with private sector, but increasingly the research shows that we need to think about the resources and capabilities in the public and non-governmental sector as well. So many of the organizations need to develop and foster capabilities, including cross-sector partnership capabilities. And those, one of the projects, for instance, we have show that those are very, very crucial. If you have a partner that is not well-versed into collaboration, and that can happen both on private and public side, you're really not likely to grasp any of the value that the collaborations have had. And we have had a study on across different countries in the world, a global study on public-private partnerships that literally demonstrated that. The second challenge is the coordination challenge. So even the idea here is even if you align incentives, you also need to synchronize and coordinate activities and tasks. And this is much more now an organizational design question, right? Exactly as Aline said, that the question is how do we design the collaborations and new forms of organizing in a way that allows for that synchronization of tasks across different organizations. You know, historically we used to look at the firm and said, well, the firm has the fiat, the hierarchy, what economists say, right, that helps to coordinate that. When you step out of that ideal world of fiat, how do you actually do that? And so there's a lot of interesting work that's going on, for instance, particularly from interorganizational project literature. Also work that looks at the principles of meta-organizing. And one of the recent papers I also have on this is we try to promote the idea of soft governance, which is the set of tools and mechanisms that really influence the informal structure of organization as really crucial. And we try to argue that particularly for organizations that pursue a dual purpose, so not just commercial, but also social purpose, that soft governance becomes really, really critical. And then the third challenge is what we label a cooptation. Might not be a ideal word, it's just another C. But the idea here is that you really need to understand the stakeholder context around you and develop and foster those capabilities. And I think this is exactly where, you know, Aline's work links in directly. This is how do organizations foster that and what kind of design also features, again, they use to engage with stakeholders and broader community. And increasingly, actually, we're talking about how do we engage community as opposed to separate organizations or economic actors. So this is kind of the big picture of the three tensions that any form of public-private organizing needs to address. And of course, we are still, me and many people work in this area are still exploring, and there are many questions we need to understand better. And I wanted to highlight 4 questions that I think are particularly important. Also because they bear important practice and policy implications. And the first one is, of course, the question of scope. And the question here is, you know, what are the limits to private mandate? How far can we go? We are seeing very different developments in Europe as opposed to, you know, other parts of the world. I'm going to stop here. The question really is, you know, how is it possible to, at the extreme version, outsource everything for the government? And I think we've had some answers on that and experiments in the past. But the question is also non-trivial because that scope boundary needs to be considered in a nuanced way and might vary actually from industry to industry and from a public good or private good perspective. And some of my research really tries to bring that nuance back in. The second question is, of course, what are the organizational boundaries? You know, how to design these different types of organizations. And so you heard from the previous presentation that there are different forms, tripartite partnerships, meta-organizations, even ecosystems. I think what is really interesting from the meta-organization lens is that you can have very independent economic actors who are just unified by the overall system-level goal. And we still do not understand very well how these organizations work, but they seem to play a key role, particularly if you look at key societal challenges, like the ones that are in the Sustainable Development Goals. And then the third question is legitimacy. How do we ensure that these organizational forms have the social contract? And the paradox here seems to be, on one hand, we have capabilities in institutional environments, again, in parts of the world, not always, that enable that. But even in those environments, we see the tensions rising and kind of weakening social contract. And that is a real problem that we don't have a solution yet. I think it connects well to the first presentation. It seems that the polarization seems to be underlying a lot of this, and also the splits in ideological stances. And then, of course, the final question, how do we actually conceive value? And how do we move beyond value in purely economic terms, or in the terms of even in economic terms, beyond the private value. And I have 4 or 5 minutes left, but I wanted to show you one very quickly, so forgive me if I fly over some of this. One of the projects we're doing with my colleague, research colleague, who is at Copenhagen Business School, Thomas Theodorowicz. This is a project in Brazil, and we adopt the approach of comparative governance. What it means, we essentially look at the challenge and try to see that challenge as being potentially addressed by either public sector or private sector, or potentially we're looking also at some of the non-governmental private organizations. And the starting point really is trying to understand, okay, so there can be different ways, as I said, different forms of organizing to address societal challenges. And one of such challenges is higher education. And we focus on Brazil, and we define this as a problem of higher education deserts. And so the idea here is that there are areas in many countries where you actually do not have access to the higher education simply because there might not be enough spots, there might be limited mobility. And so Brazil turns out to be a very good setting and also important setting to study that. Now, what we do, we look at the role of technology, and particularly we explore the rise of remote learning. So the fact that you can now enroll students in universities remotely, and how does that affect the provision or resolution of access to higher education? Does it really improve it? And the interesting thing is we actually have evidence that technology doesn't always help, it also could create trade-offs, right? Technology can create inequality, it could actually exacerbate inequality. And so we are entering here trying to see how did that remote technology adaptation in Brazil help to address the issue of access to higher education. So let me just go here. So what is very interesting here, up to 1997, generally a lot of things were restricted, but then a number of reforms took place in 1997 and 1996, which first of all allowed for-profit institutions to enter in higher education segment, and there was a huge explosion of private universities. And the government institutionalized remote learning, but with a specific caveat that it cannot be 100% remote, so you still have to have part of the core elements in some learning hub. So yes, it's remote, but it still has a geographical component to it, which we're exploring in this research. And here you see we actually try to define the areas with very, very little or relatively little access to the higher education services by looking at number of spots for students coming out of the college or high school, okay? And as you see, in fact, there's huge disparity, and many of these areas that you see here in orange actually shows that there's a real issue. And if you couple that with the lack of mobility within a country, where people cannot really freely move from one side to the other, it really becomes an issue. So on one hand, we have these areas where the services are insufficient. On the other hand, we have a rise of private actors who really jump in, and there was also a boom in remote learning. Right? So it seems that this has been, addressed at least by the market, both by the private actors, but also by the public universities. So what we did, we really looked at the differences of those adoption rates and also some of the quality outcomes. We used, the nice thing about Brazil is you get a lot of data, very granular level, so we could even link it to the quality that some of those outgoing graduating students had. And so I'll just walk you through the 3 main findings, and I'm happy to talk about it more in detail offline. So first of all, we looked at so the baseline, the benchmark is private provision, okay? So one is a state-owned or public governance, and so we looked, so is it public or private sector who's more likely to adopt the remote learning? And what is interesting here, we found that public organizations are more likely to adopt these kind of emerging technologies, but they are particularly, so in general, right? So this is the first chart, but it seems that this is particularly driven by the need to provide remote learning in the education deserts, on the places where you don't have the access. So this kind of confirms what we knew, that it is likely to be the public sector who will be jumping in to address the shortage of the public service provision. They also do it more in the places outside, but this is on a lesser scale. So that's the first outcome we find. And these are just different years that you saw there in color. Oops. back. Okay. So, however, what we also see, we see a gap when we start looking and breaking down what kind of education does this provide. And more interestingly, we broke down the remote learning into what we call the public value orientation degrees. So these would be teaching related degrees. So basically, teaching the teachers, and also other social service related degrees. So basically where you're training someone with a big spillover for social value later. And then the degrees which were more with what we call a weaker public value orientation, for instance, anything that's in management, going into business, private organizations. So what is interesting here is you really see that the social or public value orientation plays a big role with disproportionately the public sector paying much more attention to that, again, right? So again, even if we look at the big picture, we might miss the fact that not all remote learning services are the same. Some of the services you provide might have a disproportionate effect then on the future development of the regions. And we know now from existing research that, investing in training the teachers is one of the best ways how you can improve the overall economic development in those regions. So this is another important finding that we got here. And so again, you see here that particularly for the degrees with stronger public orientation, which is the blue bars, is pronounced for the public sector, and again, much stronger in the locations which we call education deserts. But, and this is the interesting trade-off, we also looked at the scale of the rollout. And here the question becomes and findings a bit more complex, because we looked at the number of students enrolled and the really effectiveness at which this, the rollout is being played out. And what we find here when we consider remote learning enrollments is that there is an advantage that favors private firms. Okay? Not surprisingly, this might, for those who know that private firms are usually better at scaling, what we find surprising is that we actually didn't see a huge difference in the outside education deserts or in education deserts. What we find interesting, though, is that it kind of suggests a trade-off. You can rely on the public sector to provide those services, but you might lack the scalability aspect that the private sector provides. So this is one of the trade-offs we try to explore here. We also tried to look at the quality differences, and what we found is interesting. There is research that already shows that the quality of education you provide remotely might be inferior to the in-person one. And this is what we found in this research. We actually found that there, if you compare, and this is a comparison of student standardized test performance compared to in-person learning, and what you find is actually lower for the remote learning. It particularly becomes lower when you look at what we call degree-specific knowledge. So if the difference between general knowledge is not so striking, it becomes particularly important when you look at the degree-specific topics. And it's interesting that we find the same gap between in-person versus remote for both public and private firms. So it really shows you another trade-off, which is, yes, we can solve through the technology some of these issues. However, at the trade-off, at the cost of potentially providing lower quality services. Now, this is very much still ongoing project, so I'm going to stop here. I'm happy to talk more about it. I think my ultimate takeaway here is that we need to be mindful that there's no quick magic solution. And we also need to be mindful that we cannot rely just on one sector or one type of actor to address these issues. We need to see complementarity, being aware that there are important trade-offs between scale, scope, and the quality of how we try to address these grand challenges. So thank you very much for that, and I'll stop here.
Thank you.
Très bien. Sorry if I'm getting disjointed because first I'm only an actor. I will explain how and in which manner, and not an academic guy with a very precise presentation, hard to understand, but certainly very smart. Very often very smart. That is my first problem. My second problem is during the, I did not know the presentation just before, then I react in the same manner that you are able to react. My second problem is for me today, it's more my life than my work. If you go on LinkedIn and you see my curriculum, I have 3 successive jobs. The first, I was leader in an NGO. The second, I was in the team of a minister about suburbs in France. And the third, for a very long time, 28 years, I'm in Schneider Electric to lead impact with different words. And something is difficult for me because, you know, it's difficult to explain why 2 + 2 makes 4. It's an evidence, it's natural. And for me, the link between all my experiences, the link between my company and many NGOs, I will have some example, it's something which is natural, and I will explain how, perhaps at the end, just close to the 2 conclusions, in fact, how it's important for Schneider Electric, especially because we are a B2B company. In general, when we speak about this topic, we consider that, and it's a problem of the CSRD, I close the bracket. It's to consider that all the companies are the same. We can have the same dashboard to speak about everywhere, at every time, for everybody, and artificial intelligence will make smart the data. Never that will be possible. Never. It's a mistake. We need to take time to understand value, DNA, people, story, jobs, many different things. And it's true for this topic too. But Schneider Electric, it's a B2B company, and not only a B2B company, but in the middle it's a large value chain with a lot of suppliers, a lot of clients. And the supplier and the clients are, in general, smaller than Schneider Electric. Then that gives the responsibility for the biggest company in the value chain. But the first thing is that we are obliged to discuss with people. Because when our clients buy our product, it's for a long time, and they want to know that we are able to discuss with them to continue to be partner on. And certainly it's a good thing to speak about this topic. My first comment is perhaps to explain why we can write in Schneider Electric corporate citizenship, which is not totally usual. It's totally linked to this topic. Because I was nominated the Chief Sustainability Officer of Schneider Electric in 2000. Very interesting. The people say, sustainability in a company, what is it? Is it possible? It's bullshit, it's nothing, blah, blah, blah. And during a long time, certainly 10 years for the younger here, you cannot understand that 20 years ago, nobody had a clear definition about what was sustainability for a company. Then I face the same question now with citizenship, and I love this question. It's because for Schneider Electric, it's true that our business is totally different than 25 years ago. Now we consider that electrification plus digitization equals sustainability, and we support all our clients to decarbonize the value chain at home, in the building, in a plant, for the grid, to include renewable energy, to charge vehicles, and so on. That is the job of Schneider Electric. The difficulty of sustainability today is when you ask a company, a state, a city, and perhaps someone about what are you doing about sustainability? The unique answer is carbon, which is the topic of the century. But certainly, if we face carbon directly, we don't find the right solutions, and we are totally in the opposition about what sustainability is. Sustainability is, we have several problems about social, about environment, planet, about the manner to make profit and so on. when we mix the problem in an holistic manner, sometimes we find better solutions. But what is sure is that, sorry, it's my, it's for my art. It's bad news. Then, with citizenship, we understand that we have to speak with people. We understand that, okay, we have to take care to planet, but we have to take care to people, and never we will obtain the results of the energy transition, on environmental transition, if we don't take care to people. You can see les gilets jaunes, you can see agriculture with the strike some months ago. We have to embark all these things together. It's why we use that. It's close to the topic that we have just today, even if we have to progress, it's not easy everywhere. So we have something, one thing on common. It's very interesting. First, I will be in Brazil next week, but not the. It's very interesting in my experience. Brazil is very different than the other country about this topic at the worldwide level, because Brazil is something like a reconciliation between. I will speak about US, but US before 2 months ago. Today I don't know, but because in Brazil, when we are speaking about sustainability and impact, responsibility, partnership, what do you want? It's not a problem to have two legs. One, it's profitability, and to consider it's a part of the performance of the company. And the second is responsibility. When we are speaking about this topic in Europe, in fact, we consider that it's a question of responsibility, and if a company makes money with responsibility, it's not totally responsibility, because we don't love the profit in general. And the vision, the Latin vision that we have, the Christian vision, in fact, Catholic vision more, that we have about the topic, it's when we are speaking about all this topic, impact, responsibility, and so on, it's some, that must be costly. And not, when you are in US, we are very open, you consider that because you can make profit with that. Brazil is very interesting because you have both together. And we consider in Brazil, and we have many partnerships in Brazil, in Schneider Electric, with the Foundation of Amazonia, with Senai, with other actors to teach. In Brazil, it's very simple, and we don't have this dichotomy in English, you say, this dichotomy between that and that. It's very interesting. That is the first topic that we share together. I love cooperation, coordination, cooptation. I understand very well the two first. For the third, certainly when I will be older, in retirement, I will understand better. But I agree that after cooperation, the question of coordination with the different actors is very important. And in Schneider Electric, we learn a lot. In the partnership with NGOs, it's a very big learning expedition, and from the beginning to the end of the partnership, we are not the same. The actors in my company who are involved in such type of partnership are not the same at the end. 2 weeks ago, I was in India. In India, we are working with a big NGO. The name is Pradam. And with Pradam, you know, we are designing, the name is, I don't love the name, it's not a problem, Climate Smart Village. It's a solution with renewable energy for agriculture, to have lighting, to have a small industry, to be able to conserve the food and so on. Never Schneider Electric was able to design alone. Never Schneider Electric was able to sell that to the village in the middle of nowhere in Uttar Pradesh. Never. And to find the way to make that economically acceptable, sustainable for a long time, it's because we are together to design, to implement, to discuss with the communities that we will be able to have this solution in more than 1,000 villages in the next 4-5 years. I don't know, but just I have this example. I have another example, a lot of example, but for example, in Europe, we try to understand how, because we try to be responsible, we try to understand how can we be active to reduce fuel poverty in Europe, which is very different than access to energy in the South country. It's easy to understand how do we contribute to reduce access, the fact that many people have a lack of energy. The fuel poverty in Europe, you know, it's between 10 or 15% of the European population in each country, more in UK than in the others, with this problem. And in fact, we don't find the solution. Today, we don't have the solution to know how we can be active for that. But with the foundation Leroy Baudouin, which is close to the state in Belgium, with Ashoka, with a big NGO, especially to support social entrepreneurs. We have detected 50 social entrepreneurs in all the European countries. We are not able to manage the relationship with them alone, but yes, we have a coordination all together in order to find something. I don't know if next time I will be expressed that, okay, we have the solution, we can implement. It's not the case. Then it's not magic. It's not magic. The people who say, oh, you know, you have to have a partnership between an NGO and a company that will be wonderful. Yes, certainly, but not each time. It's good to be on this way, it's our experience, but we have to take time. I will stop all the... And I have two examples that I will share with you that you can see on internet. In fact, I'm coordinate two actions in France, which is very close to that. The one, I'm a president of a commission in MEDEF. MEDEF is the French business organization. And in this place, I'm sure you are not in love with the MEDEF, but that's not the question. In this place, I manage something in French, it's a Manifeste des patrons engagés. In English, it's Manifesto for boss very committed. Our bosses very committed. And just to express that when you manage a company, if you don't open the window, if you don't try to be an example or to be yourself committed in NGOs differently about inclusion, environment and so on, never you will understand the society and what's happened in the future. And we can see that many CEOs from many companies on the territory and at the French level are committed in this manifesto, and it's a manner to progress in this topic. Just to conclude, because first things for Schneider Electric and the point of view of a company about this topic, one thing is for me very important to consider that it's more close to the success than in the past. It's because that is the comeback of the territory. To speak about that, we need to speak about territory. If we are in the vision of the companies between 2000 and 2019 or 20, the vision is I'm a company, I'm an international company, I'm the worldwide company, I'm a global company, and the future will be global. And that was the big vision of many companies. After many crises, the COVID, the crisis of logistics, the crisis of raw materials, the question of carbon in logistics, the question of the people prefer to have local stuff. We are speaking about circular economy, and in circular economy, it's not possible to be circular between around the world. Yes, it's circular, but we are not speaking about the same thing. That is the comeback of the territory. And we know now that to be successful somewhere, we need to be successful together, the territory and the companies. It's not possible to consider that a company could be successful in a territory which is year after year poorer. And just with that, we understand that we have to collaborate with the public sector and the NGOs locally. First thing, I think one of the good things which is to push that and to upgrade the vision is the question of the territory. The second question for me, and I use that in Schneider Electric, it's a question of innovation. You know, in Italy, when you are in a train, you have something is vietato por Jesse or something like that. When you are in a company, if we would like to be innovative, you have to open the window. Because it's not possible to be innovative only because we have a solution and we try to have the other solution with that. If we don't understand the society, if we don't understand the boundaries of the society, if we don't speak with people who have another vision of the future, the trend and so on, never, I think, we will be with the right solution for the future. And we push Schneider Electric people not because we consider, okay, we are good people, we have to support, we have to take care, we have to... Yes, it's true. But it's a win-win attitude. And in fact, when you are committed in an NGO, when you make a donation, if you don't consider that you are a winner too, never that will be very useful. Never that will be very useful. If you consider, okay, I'm a mentor because I have to give something to this person, never you will be a good mentor. Never. To be a good mentor is to consider that you win at the same level differently than the others. In this topic, to be in a right position, we are very different. But if we don't consider that is to progress each in the different manner, never we will do that. And we learned that in Schneider Electric. And the third topic for me, which is very important, it's when we are a responsible company, especially about the social issue, it's not possible to be alone. Because when we have to speak about handicapped, when you would like to recruit in the suburbs, when you would like to be a little different because you consider differently than some others, that when we have diversity, we are more innovative, we are better, we are more well-balanced, close to the society and so on. That is not possible to do that alone. And we have to do that with different organizations. And last but not least, because all these things that I express here are very positive, I can express something which could be, in your vision, not totally positive. You know, when we are in a company, we have a lot of projects. When you are in charge of impact of the company, you are I'm not totally happy about all the projects. I'm in an open discussion with you. But for example, when Schneider Electric take part to a project somewhere in Africa with a client which needs our solution to be better, and because for ethical reasons, because we have this solution to reduce environmental risk, we need to sell this solution, because that could be unethical to consider that because this project is with hazardous future, if we don't sell our product, we will increase how the project is hazardous. But in this case, we work with a lot of NGOs. And at the beginning, it's not a very friendly discussion. And even in this reality, we learned a lot in the discussion. In terms of maturity, in terms of the ability to understand why we have to be here, even if it's difficult, or why we have to stop to be here, because we prefer to give the problem for the others. just we have this reality. Just to finish, and if we have, in my view, to project that in the future, someone more, you are in, but I don't, the other, I don't know, she's somewhere. Here. When we are speaking about hybridation, you can see my English is very French. I think it's a very interesting topic for the future, because yesterday the situation was very simple. Companies were here to make profit, and NGOs and public state were here to take care to the common good. And with sustainability, with different things, and because the people who are in our company today, especially the youth, would like to be in a company with value and impact, we mixed all the things, because the NGOs have to be not profitable, but very serious if they would like to have an impact, and not to consider that the question of budget is not a question. The question of budget is key in NGOs. I was the chairman of a big NGOs 5 years ago and during 10 years. It's a very complex question, not very different at Schneider. No profitability, but we need to have some money for the future, and we need to pay the salary of the people, and we need to take care in a serious manner than the others. It's not very, very different. Just with hybridation and sustainable development goals, it's not possible to take care to sustainable development goals alone. Not possible. And then with all these things, I'm sure this topic, when we have to discuss in 10 years about that, will be very different. Because certainly the actors will have another manner to consider the others. We will be whole Brazilian, I hope. More than American today.
Okay, questions? Please.
Thank you all for your very interesting presentations. Gilles, the last intervention you did make me think of a question. That is, you talked about the tendency towards hybridation, where NGOs and companies are mixing, creating value and impact. And what I was wondering is, like, where does that leave the state, so the public sector, and how do you see the role of companies also? Because, I think like these NGOs and companies are moving towards this hybridation because the state is having a less strong capability of addressing social issues and economic issues. So how do you see this, the companies and the NGOs responding to empower again also the public actors? I don't know if that makes sense.
Because I'm an honest guy, I'm not sure that I have the answer to your question. You know, in Schneider Electric, each 5 years, we have a dashboard about 10, 11 today, 11 goals that we measure each quarter about all the topics linked to impact. 3 KPI for climate, 2 KPI for resources, 2 KPI for ethics, 2 KPI for social, 2 KPI for societal, so citizenship. And we measure that each quarter. And this 11 KPI, it's a good manner to support all Schneider Electric employees when comes the question, in your company, what is your sustainability journey? With that, everybody can understand. One of these 11 KPI is we would like to train 1 million people at the bottom of the pyramid before the end of 2025. I explained that I was in India. In India, we train each year close to 20,000 people. It's a lot, huh? 400 partnership with many different actors, local or worldwide. We have school in all the Indian states. And we do that with many NGOs and with the state. Differently state by state, because India, for us, it's a big country, but in the reality, it's a lot of very different states. And about this topic, it's very different. But never we can do that with the public sector. It's true that we worked more with NGOs than the public sector. Not what you explained, that we can solve the topic when the public sector is not able to solve. This is not that. But for many questions, especially about training, I think the best combo is to have public sector, NGOs. And in this program, for example, and thanks for French organization and French ministry, in this program that we have in the worldwide level, the French Ministry of Education support us with 20 teachers that we send in different countries in order to, with some countries like today Madagascar, Indonesia, Peru, and some others. We design the curriculum. We precise how we increase the level of vocational training, which is very good in France. Certainly, the manner to train, the more recognized at the worldwide level, and in the French, the more recognized. And we do that with the French ministries, and we have several actions. But it's true that in general we work more with NGOs than the public sector.
Thanks. Thank you for your interventions. Ilse, I hope I'm saying it right. You spoke a lot about public-private collaboration. Do you have key learnings regarding the collaboration between NGOs working on the same area of action?
So the question is about specific Brazilian context, or?
No.
Okay, generally.
Yeah.
So I think that's, thank you for the question, and I think it's connected to the previous question as well. I think what we understand now, I think hopefully we are both as academics but also practitioners beyond this naive stage where we would look for a sort of magic solution in either of the sectors, right? So we have understanding of market failure that dates already quite some time, and we do find continuous proof that you simply cannot revert purely to the private organizations, no matter how benevolent and well-intended. You do need the complementary role of public sector, but that is also a story of a public sector failure. And I think what I tried to highlight with my presentation was particularly those trade-offs. And then we also have increasing realization, you know, happy to refer here to Aline, that we are not necessarily seeing the magic solution in NGOs either. At least from the sectors that I come from and study, we see and I'm even involved at INSEAD. We have a social entrepreneurship program that tries to really train a lot of these organizations. And one of the things that we see is that there's a lot of ineffectiveness in how they seek resources and also how they operate. You know, you do end up in this paradoxical world. Well, it's an NGO, but they all compete for the same, money. Essentially, like spending a lot of time getting that. And then we also encounter those what I call like a world savior syndrome, where you think you will set up NGO, you will save that problem. And one thing we try to tell them is that the systemic problems really mean that you have to find how you click yourself in a systemic solution. Even if you're, unless maybe you're Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but even then there are limits to how much you can do. And there are very rare cases where you can definitely be an orchestrator, more and more examples where NGOs become, they might be small, but they might be kind of keystones to some ecosystems that link all other actors. And I think that is a very, very promising role. So to answer your question, I think that being humble about the disadvantages of each of these fundamental governance forms and understanding that through these failures, we can bring them together and force some sort of complementarity. But we have to really think of the design of it. And here, I think this is where the three-part partnerships, our ecosystem thinking can help us a lot, because these actors can really play different roles. So public actors still amazing in taking care of generalized externalities, in resolving long-term uncertainty. Whenever you have something that's really, you cannot assign any outcome in future, private actors will tend to underinvest, and that is just the nature of how this works. But the public sector has the ability to reduce some of that uncertainty. Now, NGOs are amazing on this, what you call the territory aspect, right? They are maybe the closest who link to the communities, and even stronger than public sector, right? And so I think there's those complementarities that need to be brought through, and hoping that that makes sense.
Thank you for your interventions, and it's very interesting that all of you are working hard on Brazil. So, I'm from Rio, so I grew up, and I know, and I've been abroad and coming back, it's been quite of a shock. I remember prior, because I have friends and people that work in the government and everything, the UPP. Especially because for some of you that have been or have seen or have been to Rio, it's very, there's a dichotomy because they have a high rise and then the beach, and then behind that, the landscape is very unique. I mean, I've traveled extensively, but Rio is a very unique city. I would love to learn your key findings, because I wanted to play a little bit of devil's advocate in terms of, you know, having the collaboration. Already the favela area, it's a very complex reality with crime rates. I live not too far from Corcovado, so I mean, to go, you have to go through the station. And Rio, it's also very divided in zones. So Zona Sul, it's like the more upscale area, and the Zona Norte, Zona Oeste, you name it, it's very different. What are some of the key findings in terms of transparency? Because there's a huge lack on accountability for the government, and therefore there's already much resistance. And to forge this type of collaboration with people, NGO, public and private sector, there are specific favelas in which, like, you have a Dutch organization working, you have a French organization, you have a British organization that come and try to do the work. But it's very complex, because when you talk about money and also the cultural violence that has been taking place with the drug trafficking, lack of access to education, I mean, we have a Gaza, you know, reality, and that's what some people don't realize. So I would love to learn, based on the studies that both of you have doing, and in terms of I just finished a huge mission in Africa. And we have probably about 7 to 8 million people in Brazil that don't have running water. So when you go to the Amazon region, it's another area. And that really impacts on education. And I work specifically on a WASH project, and that we look at infrastructure and other things. So if you both can elaborate a little bit more on that, thank you.
Boa tarde. Thank you so much for your question. I guess I'll try to give a brief answer, and what I'm showing is kind of work in progress. I think we're more pinpointing a problem at this point than able to identify a solution. But I would say the takeaway for the specific study I was looking at this point, I think, is, you know, first of all, and I think it actually speaks very much to the points that you were making. First of all, you can't focus on just a single problem. As you say, it's a complex reality, and just focus on eradicating violence without everything else that you know, is completely interdependent with that is not going to be enough or sustainable. And the issue with transparency, you know, I think part of it is when you are, I'm not talking about just bringing in partners from outside the favelas, but also making these connections inside the favelas and really being part of that reality, I think is, the UPP Social would have been a much, maybe an underemphasized aspect of what the program should have been. And if you look at interviews, for instance, that, with public, policymakers, I think one of the issues is also a lack of connection within government, right? So there's one department or one ministry that looks at, policing and violence, and another that looks at economic development. And if those don't interact either, then that's going to be a problem. So I think complex solutions. I think what we're pinpointing with this project is really the necessity for doing some of this ex ante as opposed to ex post.
Thank you. I wanted to say that maybe Leandro is the joining point why everything is in Brazil here, but probably not only that. I think maybe the reason is that you mentioned, I think it's, would love to hear about you, and maybe we should invite you in the panel here to have this conversation. But I think Brazil has the amazing scale and the diversity, but also the mindset of being an exploratory place for a lot of these things. And so it's not surprising as academics we reach out there. To go back to your question and to connect this to the drinking water, I think you're really hitting on the top of spot here, that it is about systemic impact. And so one thing we're starting to understand as we work on these sustainable development goals is how really interlinked they are. And you start, sometimes you might have seen this wicked problem map. I don't know if you've seen it. If you Google, you put a wicked problem map, and you would see that all of the grand challenges are connected and feed into each other, a kind of trigger into each other. And I think we definitely see that in case of drinking water. It is amazing how much it's interlinked to, obviously, climate change. One thing that I find in another project is that we find that even the solutions to the drinking water problem are aggravating the climate change. So in a way, by trying to solve some of these problems in a very noble way, we're actually triggering more of the same issue. And again, I don't have an answer to that. I think, again, the answer might be not going with a knee-jerk reaction to one type of actor for that solution precisely, I think, which is a common theme in this. There is a very humble experience from, for instance, World Bank's experimentation in water sector provision. It is generally came with the best intentions, a lot of money being thrown, creating public-private partnerships in water provision. Many of those failed, largely because either they didn't account for the fact that you cannot just simply throw in classic private incentives and hope that everything will fine, because the private actors will go in and look for some form of profitability, and then they will cherry pick, and if you don't have any subsidy or any kind of form to take care of the other parts of society that cannot pay for something that is essential good, you won't find a solution, and you end up in a problem with weak institutional environments, and that is a little bit the elephant in the room as well. What we do systematically find in research is that the public-private partnerships work where you have a strong institutional environment, where you have strong rules of the game, where you can enforce those, where like capable governments, both on a state level, but regional level, and I think that is just that's one finding that is very, very clear that's come out from a number of research projects here, and I think we really need to talk more about that, and I think it's that quality of institutions that really plays a deciding role if those collaborations work out or not.
Unfortunately, we ran out of time, so I hope this conversation continues into lunch. Thank you very much.
You have lunch, pardon, just next door.